Hey, good afternoon, everyone. It's Trevor Sharuka here from Smashing Pixels and the Level Up Academy. Today, we're going to be talking about another subject that you might want to take on during this lockdown that you're in. You know, those things that you wish you had more time to do, but we never seem to have more time. Well, we've been sharing a lot about doing a blog, about turning the video camera on and just talking to your customers. Here's another topic that a lot of people have been mentioning that they'd like to do if they had the time, but have not started. And what we're going to be talking about is setting up podcasting. We all know it. We've all seen Joe Rogan and other people at the top of the game doing it. It seems to be the it thing again, and everyone wants to do it, but no one knows how to start doing it. So what I've done, I've reached out to my good friend, Robert Lavigne, who has over 100 podcasts. Actually, I think it's over a couple hundred podcasts under his belt. He's been doing interviewing for the last decade to share some tips and tricks on how you can get started podcasting today to get your information out to the customers who are looking and trying to find you. So, Rob, why don't you introduce yourselves to the audience and let everybody know a little bit more about you?
Hey, I'm Robert Lavigne. I've been podcasting for about a decade now. Pretty much since I moved to Brantford. I actually came to Brantford because of a podcast and started seriously podcasting upon my arrival. And most people probably know it more from the Social Business Hangout, which was 100 in-depth interviews with people in the region. And as Trevor alluded to, I've probably done about, I don't know, 15 different podcast projects. So the number of interviews is in the 200 to 300 range for sure.
Well, you know what, Rob? That's before we get into the gear and what everybody wants to talk about, the sexy stuff. Um, you alluded to interviews.
Yep.
So before you go out and pull out that credit card at Best Buy or go online and order the stuff, um, interviewing, it starts with learning and knowing how to interview. So, what are a few tips and tricks that you can share with the audience? Maybe some do's and don'ts from your point of view on how they can start learning to do good interviewing skills.
Okay. Well, first of all, my preferred podcast media, theme, contract, whatever you want to call it, is the interview style, right? So there's a lot of different podcasting styles out there. I've done voiceover podcasts as well. They're story based. So, a lot of what I'm going to say is obviously skewed towards the interview style because that's my preference, because it's more of an educational thing for both parties in this case, right? So back to your point, though, a lot of it really comes down to something I didn't have when I did interviewing back in the days when I was interviewing candidates for jobs. I wasn't as good as an active listener. So that's the number one thing that you get better at when you do interview style podcasting, because you're always listening. You have to listen. You can't be just waiting to interject. You're in charge of the pace of the interview. So you're juggling a lot of balls while actually interviewing a person, but a lot of it at the end of the day comes down to really listening, and I mean truly listening. You put the ball out there, you see what comes back. If it's a yes no answer, you've done a poor job at framing the question. So frame the question better. That's obviously, you allude often to the concept of open-ended questions. There's nothing worse than a yes no, absolutely nothing worse. So make it open-ended, build up to what you're trying to get to, have a sense of what you're trying to get to, but don't be restrictive. There's a box there for a reason, but at the end of the day, you can adjust accordingly based on the pulse of the room. And that's either the audience, if you're doing this live in front of an audience, and the audience members start screaming questions, well, you start incorporating that into the process. Or if it's just in a one-on-one, the actual guest may allude to something that you didn't even know about in your prep work. And that's the other aspect too, is prep work. Back when we were doing this on a weekly basis, every week was a different topic. So you had to do your prep work for that. You need to be on par with the guest. You can't be completely and utterly unaware of what their business or topic is. If you're talking about a book, you got to make sure you understand the book. If you understand the business better, you have a better sense of what the person's going through, because you realize a lot of times, unless you're talking to the pros or the people that do this on a regular basis, most of these people have never talked about themselves or their business or their passion or whatnot, let alone some of their deep, darkest secrets, and a lot of them come up when you do verbose-based interviews. So that's the last bit. Is it more of a long form, verbose, Joe Rogan can talk for 2 hours, or is it more snippets? So it's a wide spectrum, but at the end of the day, it's a conversation that's recorded, and the best bits hopefully become something that's used elsewhere.
So, like a reporter going in to do a story, have your questions ready and then listen and let the guest go on his journey of telling this story. And then as you're listening, maybe impart a little bit more wisdom. It almost sounds like the more interviews you do, you're practically giving yourself your own MBA of local knowledge for the interviewees or the interviewees that you're talking to.
Oh, most mediums are either educational or educational or entertainment in nature. So if you want to be entertained, and we're talking podcasting here, there's the entertainment podcast, and if you want to educate, there's a lot of education podcasts. But here's the best bit: is when you're doing those educational podcasts, you're being educated as much as everybody else. And I used to joke about this. There's been a few people that have been guests on a repeat basis, but there's only been one person that's been a guest on every single friggin' interview, and that's me. So when you incorporate 200 unique conversations or viewpoints or whatnot, and you incorporate that into your overall, continual learning process, which a lot of this really is at the end of the day. This is more about history and learning more than podcasting in any way. But my point being, at the end of the day, that knowledge comes with you. And trust me, I had a choice, quite easily where I would spend my money, for my MBA, as you hinted at. And I opted to go completely opposite. All my courses were done over Twitter with conferences around the world 10 years ago when that was the thing. And all of my learnings about business and concepts and pick a topic, I'll reach out to an expert and learn from them. You pick up 10, that knowledge and incorporate it in, you start seeing the patterns. And I'm a commerce major, so commerce is all about the larger viewpoint of the model, right? So the more variables that are in that model, the more you understand those variables and how that equation works out, it really becomes, for me, an education process for commerce. So yeah, it was my MBA. I don't joke about it. That was truly MBA effort.
Nice.
Yeah.
So um, now the next part we want to talk about is podcasting. I think everyone has a vision in their head what podcasting is.
Mm.
Traditionally, back in the day, we would have listened to traditional podcasts, which were, easy way for someone to start up a radio station, i.e., like a Howard Stern could have been considered like a podcast. Now we see Joe Rogan, we see David Rubin, and we see a bunch of other guys that are using YouTube as the visual medium, but they're still utilizing podcasting techniques. So, what in a broad brushstroke, what are we considering podcasting these days?
Well, to me, podcast is less about the technology, like just right here, moving closer to the mic. Obviously, now all of a sudden I'm in a completely different position. So understanding the technology plays into podcasting, and podcasting at its root form is all about understanding the audio mechanism, the audio medium. So that involves the recording, the editing, the capturing, the distribution, the marketing, all that. So back in the day, we would just focus on the audio spectrum because the cost of audio was just getting to a point where it was cost effective to do it in your home basement, right? Video is not necessarily at that point yet to what it is right now. The gear that's in this room trumps what most major news, mediums have out there available to them, and we're finding that out right now when most of these people are having to work from home, right? So a lot of that technology has really evolved over the years. So people have been able to incorporate more technology, just like I've accumulated a crap ton of gear by doing podcasting. People can go out there and acquire a phone and have 3/4 of what I have in my basement and still be able to do a podcast that is both audio and, if they choose, video. And as we always talk about, if you capture something in video, you can extract the audio and you can have both a video audio version as well as just an audio version, and the list goes on, right? So at the end of the day, it's less about how you capture it. It's more about what style of podcasting or what style of communication, what style of media do you want to have? Is it entertainment? Is it educational? And then there's styles within there. Is it interview based? Is it one person speaking about what they truly know and everything is about what they know, or is it a group effort such as a story base, like we would have done back in the 1930s? So, history repeats itself in many ways. So this audio spectrum is the easiest means of getting that content out there. It's also the best means of being listened to while doing other things. You can't watch video and drive your car legally. You can listen to the radio.
Yeah.
So here's the thing: you can listen to the radio, or you can listen to your MP3, or if you are talking MP3, i.e., your phone or integrated device, that's now a potential downloaded, a podcast. So a lot of people have hours available to them because of commuting. Now, a lot of these people are discovering a lot of free time because now all of a sudden they're not having to, commute as much. But at the end of the day, that ability to take an audio format is key. Whether or not you scale that up, that really comes down to your time, budget, and expertise. I started with basically an MP3 recorder and the shittiest of mics. The stuff I have now pales in comparison. I don't use 3/4 of the stuff I've accumulated so much, right? But at the end
Well,
of the day, it's not about the gear necessarily.
well, and you kind of um, uh, hit on it a little bit when we talked about back in the day and now. Ease of use has really come a long way. I mean, and when I say the kids these days, I mean anyone who is just getting into this, no matter how old you are, they don't realize just how easy it was. I mean, a very
How,
popular.
how hard it was.
No, sorry, how hard it was. A very how easy it is now. A very popular vlogger, which we could say is almost podcast now, but more vlogging. The story of Casey Neistat and him putting his video on his website because you didn't have YouTube back then, and you had to pay for traffic. All of a sudden, having to pay tens of thousands of dollars because he has a video that 100,000 people watched. We don't have that problem anymore. Same with we don't have the problem of having to go out and get a radio station's worth of gear to do a podcast. Ultimately, you can have one of these fancy schmancy $9 holders, put your phone in it just like this, and hit the record button, and you could start your channel. In fact, um, it's been a while since I've utilized additional channels, but I mean it used to be a pain in the neck to upload to iTunes. You know that how many
Oh,
the process that iTunes used to be, and then now you go to Podomatic and you hit submit, and it automatically just pushes it to iTunes now.
well,
Uh,
it's also simple stuff like, back in the day before I had compression software for video, I was uploading gigabytes of video, as opposed to compressing it, before I go down. So technology definitely plays into it. Just like I said, this mic, if I'm playing off to the mic, I can definitely do a lot more with this mic than just something on the phone. But at the end of the day, it should not necessarily be that. It should be about the content. It should be about why you're doing it, because you're not going to do it for the fame. If you're doing that, I joke about there's as many guitars in pawn shops as there are new podcasters. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, some people are going to try it and go for it, have fun with it, and if it's not for you, great. But treat it like you would anything else that you're learning. And there's things that you can learn in the process, such as what is the story? Because to your point, the point of entry is so low now. The cost of entry is pretty much non-existent unless you truly want to have good gear. And like I said, you can have a mic like this, or you don't need a mic like this, right? But at the end of the day, what are you going to put out there? Is it going to be satisfactory to you? And if that's the case, you'll never be disappointed because you've done it for another reason. And if you're doing it for something else, are you willing to put in the effort and the hustle and the marketing and the costs to push something against a wave of content? And we're talking a tsunami of content, especially over the next 9 months. You're not just talking about a boom of babies 9 months from now. 9 months from now, the amount of content, both audio, video, conferences such as this is going to make the last 20 years pale in terms of new content. So you're competing against content in a world where attention is so little. So back to the original point, audio breaks a lot of those barriers to be able to get people that have time to be able to focus on something that is more than 9 seconds, like a like.
exactly. So we've been talking about learning how to listen, writing down your questions, understanding what a podcast is. Talked a little bit about gear. We don't have to go out and again spend all the last bit of money that we have. Uh, Everyone, and I mean everyone, has one of these in their pocket. Barrier to entry is non-existent anymore.
Nor is the barrier of distribution, right?
Yeah,
No, you're
even
not
better.
having, yeah, you're not having to manually enter, the XML for your podcast one line at a time and making sure that the exact file size is set up and blah 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 blah. No, it's a push of a button, right? And that's the problem is people push that button and they'll throw it over the fence.
So then it comes down to getting guests, and I know a lot of people, they're not sure where to start. Who do I ask? Of course, everybody wants to uh, interview the famous people, the people who have a massive following, but sometimes they're a little bit harder to get to. I mean, if you want to kind of ego stroke them or ego bait them and tell them how great they are and that you've been following them and you'd love to interview them, it'll bring them closer. But we don't always have that luxury. So who do you start interviewing? Who's guest number one for someone who's never done an interview before that wants to make sure that how they set it up works, it sounds good, and they know how to ask questions. Where are you starting?
Well, once again, we're assuming that we're going to do the interview style podcast. So,
Yes.
we're going to focus on that. At the end of the day, it's like any form of whether or not you were blogging, whether or not you were a reporter or a journalist. What are you trying to get? Is there a larger story? So you pitch the larger story and what their role is as part of that larger story. If you've got that mapped out, if you're basically just starting for the sake of starting, find other people that are interested in doing it as well. It's hard enough to try to get someone to talk recorded or in front of an audience, right? To get them to do that, you want someone that's eager and willing, so that you're not having to focus so much of your effort on pulling the questions, right? You want to have something that's maybe because you're learning as well, so you need someone that can play with you. So if you're doing an interview style, there's a bit of that back and forth, or you're basically just saying, hey, none of us know what we're doing, and that's the style, right? Now, by the time you want ego stroking or whatnot to pull in because you want their numbers or whatnot. If you're doing a good enough job, they're actually going to hear about it and they'll potentially reach out to you because there's a certain subset of these people that just want the attention. So be ready for that and to a degree, leverage it, right? But there's also the ones that you are interested in. And at the end of the day, it's twofold. You need a body of work, right? So if you're really trying to get like a 13-time world champion to come to your basement or an MPP or an MP or someone of significance, quote unquote, you want to be on their par. You want to have that experience that is on par with their experience, because they've either done radio before or they've done video, and you don't want to be compared to Steve Palkin. If these people have been interviewed by Steve and you're giving them something not on par, right? So a lot of it is you got to be on par with the guests, and that starts with the beginning. So start with those that are on par with you, because I think the ad energy, it trumps everything else.
Well, and I know that, and we've all seen these before, where that people walk out of interviews, or people, get discouraged when they're being interviewed, especially people at a higher level, because they've been asked those questions over and over and
Oh
over
my
again.
God, yeah.
Find questions that your audience wants that's different than what they want, because then that kind of shakes things up, and you get a real interview out of
Well, it comes back
your
to
guests.
what is the original theme and structure of what you're trying to pitch, right? So if you're going for a particular angle, you're now able to maybe ask 20 people that unique angle, So right now would be, how would this epidemic pandemic affect you, right? How many people are using that? It's
Yep.
worse than the actual pandemic, but that's
Yeah.
beside but at the end of the day, it's the theme. So all of these asks go with that, right? My last series of podcasts, I always made sure that I had their charity of choice talked about in the first 10 minutes of the podcast, right? So right off the bat, it wasn't something where I'm giving back to them, but I'm giving back to something that's more important, something that's important to them, right? So you appeal to the higher nature. So that's either I'm going to give you the best interview you've ever had and deliver on that. I'm going to give you a great experience. I'm going to give you a first time experience if you've never done it, right? So it changes depending on who you ask. But trust me, it took me 99 episodes before I had the ability to interview Walter Gretzky.
Well, and
99 interviews, right? Come on. You don't
the
you don't go to that right off the bat unless you're as good.
correct, and the other thing too. make sure you've got your questions written down, because I can tell you, we're flying towards when we have to finish, because we both have other things that we got to jump into for more interviews. But I mean, we're already at the 21-minute mark. We got about 6 minutes to wrap up, and I got 25 more questions. So now I've got to think, which ones do I want? But time is either your best friend or your worst enemy. You ask a question that you don't get an answer to, oh, it's going to be a tough time to fill. But you are having a good time in your interview, as we are right now. Time flies, and the job of your job as an interviewer, I've always looked at, is twofold. One, to keep the interviewee engaged, but also to keep the audience watching. If we're not able to keep the audience watching, then we're really letting them down. And that, so tips on, I've got a couple more questions, but tips on asking good questions, Rob.
At the end of the day, sometimes it's about, who's your audience in the first place and what's on their mind, right? You're a conduit at the end of the day for both parties.
Well,
So,
and go ahead. Sorry, I went to interrupt
that
you.
that was fundamentally it. If you understand the fact that you are a conduit, and you're having to understand what the guest is about and what the audience is about, do your research, both ends of the spectrum. At the end of the day, that is your job. And the better you do that prep work, whether or not it's something you just do naturally because you've done it so much, or you actually prep for it. If you're doing something weekly, you better be starting prepping for that interview, the day after you've done the last one, right? So
And
it's the prep work and the
the,
practice.
yeah, the other thing too I was going to say is, also, if you're not sure what your audience wants to hear, use your channels, use your social reach to say, hey, I'm in, what are you guys interested in doing? People that talk to us about, hey, we want to learn how to do emails, we want to learn how to
Yep.
do podcasting. So it's like, okay, I'm going to go out and get what my audience wants, um, and that's going to make it a better interview just off the bat. So use your channels, ask them, hey, I'm interviewing this person, or in this industry, what do you guys want to learn about it? And they will tell you. If anything that social media has given to us, it's the ability to share information.
Correct.
So
Oh, yeah, you had another question there before we wrap up.
yeah. So we've done all this work. Now the hard work actually begins. I think people think, you do the blog, that's the hard work. No, it's the distribution. Personally, I like to break things up quite a bit, and that. But why don't you talk about, because I might have stolen a couple of these ideas from you, so I don't want to make it sound like they were my ideas. But po- podcast is
You,
done.
you,
It's in the can. How do we get legs out of it? What do we do?
Yeah. Think of it as the art versus the business, right? So the art of podcasting involves everything about learning the skill set, whether or not it's learning your voice, learning the use of the mic, understanding how all the gear connects together, starting with one piece of equipment and getting to a point where you're juggling 50 balls in the air at the same time, right? So there's the art. And the best part about the art is it's you. It's no different than learning to play an instrument, whether or not it's a guitar, piano, whatever. It's are you getting better? Am I a better podcaster, interviewer, whatever you want to call it, now versus 10 years ago? Yes. As much as the tattoos there, yes. But at the end of the day, then there's the business side, and that's really the hardest part, because art you can control, the business you can influence, but at the end of the day, you're competing with a gazillion people that are now have the same access and the same desire, and now in many cases the same amount of time. That is not a podcasting issue. That is not even a marketing issue. That is a commercial question, you know. And if you want to make money, then you need to truly understand the commerce and work all aspects of the commerce. What is your brand? We talk about the Joe Rogans or whatnot. Joe Rogan came with a huge following. Chris Jericho came with a huge following. Nikki Sixx in his podcast, he's Motley Crue.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, you're not those people, because you're not those people. Now, don't be disappointed because at the end of the day, you don't start playing the guitar and next thing you know, you're Justin Bieber, whatever. If you're doing it for the art, then the question is, how do I leverage the channels to get them to the people that need it? So if you're like me, most of my podcasting has been educational in nature. That fits into my LinkedIn strategy. So I've built my network and my reputation, if you will, over the last 10 years via my podcasting. If Rob is good enough to ask these questions to this diversity of people, then I think I can hire him to be my content creator for hire, to be able to do my internal podcast. That's my business model. It's not about sponsorship for me. It's not about affiliate gigs, but that's a model that you can use, right? But those are not podcasting. That's your business and my business, when we're not doing podcasting, right? So it's the whole enchilada. And trust me, it's the easiest time to do it and the hardest time to do it.
Yeah. So you mentioned LinkedIn, sharing your information on LinkedIn. One thing I really like about Joe Rogan that he took from the marketing side is he knows that people are not going to watch a 2 hour interview. So he breaks it up into 30 different parts. He finds the best parts. Joe Rogan comes from a comedy and interviewing background. He knows the bits that work. So he pulls those out. He puts that in front of you because he knows that he has your attention for 3 minutes or 8 minutes or 10 minutes. Do the same thing. You have a long podcast, pull out the stuff that's great. Convert that podcast into a blog. Take that blog, convert it into a social media share. And so there goes your content creation. And now you're having to worry less about how do I create unique content. You just did. You interviewed somebody that's relevant. There's intention to it, and you're sharing it to the audience that wants to know more about this information. So, Rob, at that, man, 30 minutes just flew by. Thanks a lot for taking time out of your schedule. You mentioned LinkedIn. If people wanted to follow you, any other channel that they can connect with you or watch your stuff on?
If you search for Robert Lavigne, I'm sure you're going to find me. But most people remind me that the Social Business Hangout is still out there, even though it's been recorded a very long time ago. So if you want to see classics, search Social Business Hangout. There's 100+ episodes there. And it really is a nice snapshot of an era, which is kind of nice.
Wonderful. Robert, listen, have yourself a great day. Thanks again for teaching and sharing with the audience the kind of beginning do's and don'ts about podcasting, and any last words of advice to give give the listeners a little point down the road to push them in the right direction.
If you're doing it for the art of it, you can't fail. Simple as that.
There we go. And I'm calling this podcast "The Art of Podcasting." So I think it'll have some legs on that.
Yes, thank you for that one. Take
Yeah.
care, buddy.
All right. See you, Rob. Take care.